All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to do episode 2 of the Better Bidding series right now. So, just to give a recap of last week, and I think there were maybe one or two things I missed as well. So, I'm going to walk through that, and then we're going to move on and look at the rest of like the no trump section on the card. All right. So, last week I kind of just gave an intro to kind of like my thought process and why we wanted to do this. You know, my bidding has evolved, so I thought I would update this series with all the new approaches I've learned since then. And so, we were walking through the no trump section. So. No longer playing a 15 to 18 or recommending that rather, just going with the typical strong, good 14 to 17. Then we talked about the kind of like follow-ups with Stayman, playing transfers with size ask and two diamonds being diamonds or two no trump being diamonds or both minors weak. With Stayman, I talked about a few different variations that come along with that. We talked about how we could play crawling Stayman, but with crawling Stayman now, it's only on hands with 5 hearts. Or I mean, you could have a 4/4, I guess, that you maybe just want a garbage Stayman with, but you know you don't have diamonds and can't tolerate a pass, so maybe you just bid 2 hearts in that case. But generally, it's a 4/5 hand. If you're 5/4, the recommendation is either to just transfer to spades, or then over Stayman and then over partners like 2 diamond response for no major, bid 2 spades, which shows like 5 spades with a light invite. And light being in the sense that you wouldn't even transfer and like invite with this hand through 2 no trump or some other means. So it should be like a kind of like unbalanced 6 or 7 count that you think opposite the right hand from partner might strike gold, which I have seen few instances of in just like since I've started playing that more frequently. So we talked about that extended Stayman when you know Texas transfers come into place over 2 diamonds. We talked about how we flip. Kind of like how we treat the weak major minor hand, where you would start with Stayman and then bid 3 minors as the follow up to that show weak hand, as opposed to transferring and just like never getting a major into the picture. And then likewise, we talked about how that would correlate with how you would handle the minor suit transfers, where instead of that showing shortness like to bid 3 major later, that would actually show either that suit or the other, depending on like what your preference is for whether you should show or whether you should show the other suit. Then we talked about Puppet. The one thing I think I forgot to mention with Puppet last week was, we were talking about the responses. We're playing a low info Puppet, in which case we won't directly show a 4-card major. 3 diamonds just basically denies a 5-card major. But the flip side to that is, like, what are you going to do on a hand where you have 4 spades and 5 hearts? Now, I'm assuming that you're probably not playing Flannery. Because Flannery it's not a dead system or a dead convention, but it's played by a pretty low number of pairs these days. So with those Flannery hands where you also have strong no trump shape and you've opted to open a strong no trump because it would be awkward to reverse, or you just are going to treat your 4-5-2-2 as something else. The one thing you can do to properly show that hand is you could actually use 3 no trump as your response to Puppet in that case. This is the one time you would use that. In typical Puppet, you would actually have, 3 no show like deny it like a 4 or 5 card major, but here like it can explicitly mean that you're 4 or 5 in the majors, and that's useful because partner can now place the contract accordingly. You could essentially use like 4 clubs and 4 diamonds as like a punt to hearts, and then 4 diamonds to punt to spades, and you can give meanings to the in between bids as well. But that's kind of like the thought process when it comes to that, is to be able to flip that, because then you actually have the way to show that hand. And it's useful to show that shape specifically as opposed to kind of like just burying that, because it could help partner place the contract accordingly. Then 3 diamonds and 3 hearts and 3 spades are kind of like just your straightforward bids, where if you probably didn't have a lot of time to connect with somebody beforehand, that's probably what you would be playing in those cases. And yeah, so now we're going to tackle this bottom part here for the no trump bid, and then go over into this box. And I think that will cover what we want to do in this episode. All right, well, I think the first part is pretty straightforward, just playing Texas transfers. Now, of course, there is South African Texas as well, which is maybe not a popular alternative in the US, but certainly is kind of like elsewhere. The idea being that you would bid 2 steps below for your transfer. So 4 clubs would be a transfer to hearts, and 4 diamonds would be a transfer to spades. One of the advantages of that is you can actually give that in-between bid some meaning to help you kind of like better gauge where you belong on the hand. Maybe if you're just not going to purely sign off, if you were kind of like on the cusp, that gives you that ability to uncover that you wouldn't before. But that's kind of like just That's not really a thing here in the U.S. Not as much, for better or for worse. So I'm just going with like the typical Texas transfers. So how would you handle those in-between bids? So handling those in-between bids, there's a lot of different ways you can show that type of hand. One option, for example, would be that you could actually start with like the transfer at the 2 level and then jump to 4, which is basically kind of like a quant. So like a no trump, 2 diamonds, 2 hearts, 4 hearts. That's basically like, that's showing at least 6 hearts with kind of like an in-between hand. So if partner's at the top of their bid or just really has a good fit, they should actually go on at that point and key card. You know, why have a sign off for that when you would just be doing that with Texas transfers? You know, if you are all Jets go for, you know, looking for slam, you could just key card after Texas as well. Or you could, you know, just transfer at the 2 level and then like make a splinter or some sort to help kind of partner better gauge what your fit is actually like. So there are different ways to do that as well. But as I was saying, you know, South African Texas definitely is an alternative that's out there that might be worth discussing with your partner. I think Smolin is relatively assumed. Not too much to talk about with Smolin here. So Smolin, for those who aren't perfectly familiar, is a way to show kind of like the 5-4 major hands after Stamen. So a no trump, 2 clubs, 2 diamonds. You would jump to 3 of your 4-card major to show that you have 4 of that major and 5 of the other. The idea being that you would jump in the other major because, you know, you're going to have at best the 5-3 fit, and you can right side in that way when you keep the strong hand concealed. So Lebensal is a very good way to handle interference over a no trump. Now the one thing that I'm going to change here, compared to what we talked about in the past, and this is just based on kind of like my perception of how kind of like this has evolved over time and how I've started to play it more often, is that we're going to go from playing regular Lebensal to playing transfer Lebensal. So it's still the same premise, but you kind of just think of everything as, you know, having transfers afterwards. So to set the foundation, you know, 1 no trump, they interfere with something presumably other than 2 clubs, because you might just play your system or have interference or have other bids in place of that. So no trump, like 2 diamonds or 2 hearts or 2 spades. 2 no trump is still Lebensal. 2 no trumps are relay to 3 clubs. Pass or correct. What's different though is that you actually use like the 3-level bids that you would use before to basically be a transfer into, you know, the next step. So for example, like a no trump, let's say they interfere 2 hearts. 3 clubs would be invitational or better with diamonds. The idea with that is, again, I think it's kind of like just based on the basis of concealing the strong hand, is to be able to transfer those bids instead of bid them directly. That way, if you're not going to wind up in no trump, you know, you're not just putting like the strong no trump on kind of like on the table. And more importantly, if they're interfering directly over your 1 no trump bid, the lead's not going directly through them either, which is generally a good thing. So transfer Lebensal is kind of like the basis there. The one thing to consider is what does it mean to actually transfer into like the suit that they've either shown or are implying. So, you know, 1 no trump, 2 hearts, for example, whether that's just hearts or whether that's hearts in another suit. What does transferring into hearts represent versus what is actually bidding that suit directly represent? So in classic Lebensal, bidding the suit directly would show Stamen without a stopper. So a no trump, 2 hearts, 3 hearts would be, you know, Stamen without a stopper. That way, if partner doesn't have a stopper themselves, you could, you know, gauge a potential minor contract if you don't have like a spade fit. Even though you're playing transfers, a lot of people still play kind of like that part still applies. So a no trump, 2 hearts, 3 hearts would still be the same exact thing. So the question would be, well, you said we're playing transfers, so what is a no trump, 2 hearts, 3 diamonds, which would be a transfer into hearts? You instead use that as your spade transfer in this case. So a no trump, 2 hearts, 3 diamonds is invitational or better with spades. That way you give the pathway for 1 no trump, 2 hearts, 3 spades to be invitational or better with clubs. Not that you wouldn't have been able to do that before, but you know, you kind of just keep that bidding intact at least. So you basically just play transfers except for like the direct Q bid of their suit. So you still have your transfers in place there. So we'll say that. There's no good place to indicate that on this card, so maybe I'll just put that down here. And, kind of like with typical Lebensall, fast still denies is the idea. And then playing negative doubles as well. Now, of course, there are times where you definitely want to be able to penalize, them, your opponents after they interfere over a no trump. But it is more typical that you would want to kind of like compete on the hand instead of penalize. So I feel like the negative double, since it's more frequent, is more useful in this case. I've actually had rules with partners before where we've said, vulnerable, this would be penalty, and non-vulnerable, this would be takeout. I guess that was just giving us the opportunity to collect telephone numbers, which, given the bidding at some people at the club level, definitely is not a crazy idea. But what I would say at the same time, though, is that negative double isn't just restricted to, like, the responder. The opener can also make a negative double with their hand if they feel like the situation applies. Like, if I open, a 4-2, 4-3 no trump with, like, a decent 16 count, for example, and they overcall 2 hearts on my left, depending on the colors, if it gets passed back to me after, like, their 2 hearts interference, I might make a takeout double in that case. So I'm actually teeing it up to my partner if they were maybe just sitting over there with a crab pass to do that. Likewise, partners shouldn't be doubling light enough where they're hanging you, if you feel like you should be able to convert this. So, like, if I had that same exact hand, but, you trade my 2 hearts and make it a decent 4-card suit where I want to defend, my partner shouldn't be doubling, like, on the, trashiest of hands necessarily. Like, maybe occasionally it's a 5 count, but hopefully it's a 5 count that, has enough promise that versus my hand with some trump tricks that we actually have a shot at just nicking 2 hearts. So I would say you shouldn't go necessarily crazy with that, but I think it is more frequent enough that you would want to have this in your artillery. All right, well, that covers the one no trump thing section. I guess one thing we could talk about, and I don't know if this belongs in this episode or maybe this just belongs in its own one, but, how to handle interference over no trump, because there really is no good place to have that on the card, but it is important to have these discussions with a partner to figure out how you would defend against their no trump defense. So if you can think of, like, the most typical bids that come up, when I say typical, I'm also considering non-natural. Like, if it's a natural bid, I think it's pretty straightforward how to kind of, like, contend with that. Transfer Lebensall is really useful for something like that, as we just discussed. But thinking about the artificial bids that typically come up in, like, no trump interference. Ones that typically kind of, like, come up these days is, like, 1 no trump, 2 clubs showing the majors. If you're playing landy or multi-landy or something like that where that implies those 2 suits. Is double still Stamen? And what do the bids mean? Are you still playing transfers in that situation, which you certainly could? Or is it just kind of like an unusual over unusual situation where you actually just have those bids, represent the minors, and you kind of just give up on the majors altogether? Because even if you had a major fit, it's going to split terribly. I think that's all decent discussion. I have treatments with partners, and I don't know if I want to go into enough depth where I actually, discuss that at length now, but it is something worth considering. So, how to handle, like, the 2 clubs both majors interference, or how to handle the 2 diamonds 1 major interference. Although in that case it's a little more nebulous because they haven't told you which major it specifically is. Obviously, you can probably look at your hand and figure out what it is. Well, maybe one of you can, depending on what your hand actually looks like, but you do have to have treatments to that. I think those are the 2 most typical interference bids. I feel like in the bridge that I played in the last few years, it really is kind of like that being the typical no trump defense. There are things like Meckwell out there where 2 clubs is clubs in a major, and 2 diamonds is is diamonds in a major, and the majors are natural. But that seems to have kind of waned in popularity. So there is something to be said with that. The other thing to potentially consider is how to handle the penalty double of 1 no trump, which usually comes up more against weak no trumps, but there are people who played against strong no trumps. One thing that I'll talk about when we get to this section later in this series is I don't think that's necessarily a crazy treatment. I can tell you from experience that the few times where I've been able to wheel out a penalty double against a strong no trump, it's worked pretty successfully. So there is something to be said for that. So when it comes to having a penalty double, or the opponent's having a penalty double over a strong no trump, you usually want to just have a way to escape. we call this like a run out in these situations. Obviously, you probably don't want to play one no trump because it may not go well. Could actually turn out to be your best spot, but usually there's a better escape and you may not get doubled in that escape. So the idea is to play some type of run out system. A very popular one is don't runouts. Don't runouts are just basically similar in nature to playing don't over one no trump, which I guess is also a no trump defense, but I haven't seen it as frequently at higher levels where, redouble over that double would be, hey, I have one suit asking me to bid two clubs, and then we pass or correct, and then, two clubs is clubs in a higher, two diamonds is diamonds in a higher, and so on and so forth. So you kind of like just play the same thing, and partner can pretty easily from their hand determine, hey, I want to play this, or I want to end up, asking you what your other suit is, and we'll play here instead. Doesn't always work out super successfully. There could be plenty of times where it just stumbles into a bad fit that may be even worse. But it is good to have the opportunity to run to something because more often than not, a trump suit will play better than just scrambling to find 7 no trumps or 7 tricks in a 1 no trump contract where one opponent just has a bunch of points. So that's my spiel on kind of like the 1 no trump box. Definitely happy to answer any questions and go into that in more depth. But let's cross over into this section and then knock this out quickly. So, all right, so 2 no trump. Just gonna go with the typical range here. I guess your typical range is 20 to 21, but in the spirit of upgrading things, we'll say 19 plus to 21 because kind of like same philosophy applies. If I have a 5-card suit, a decent 5-card suit with a 19 count, I'm kind of stuck. If I open one major, do I want my partner passing? And then we maybe miss out on either on a very tight 3 no trump that may just work if they have kind of like that magical 5 count, maybe not. So I will definitely be tempted to upgrade hands in that case, which is why I'm just marking that up front. I'm not a huge fan of typical puppet stamen, over 2 no trump. I was playing that for a while, but I've kind of like just dropped that entirely. In fact, more often than not now I'm just playing regular stamen over 2 no trump, and then playing small in its place. So by that I mean 2 no trump, 3 clubs, 3 diamonds. You still play 3 hearts and 3 spades as small in this situation where you basically show 5-4 and you're able to handle that pretty easily. If I were to play, some variant of puppet stamen over 2 no trump, I would probably opt for what I would call Muppet stamen or, modified puppet stamen. So the idea being 2 no trump, 3 clubs, at least what I have played when it comes to Muppet stamen, and given that the word modified is in it, there obviously are different modifications that can come along with it. But the modification that I played is that you flip the 3 hearts and 3 no trump bids. So in typical puppet stamen, 3 hearts would show 5 hearts and 3 no trump would just deny a 5 or 4 card major. But you can actually flip those, and then 3 hearts becomes your denying a 5 or 4, and then 3 no trump becomes your promise of 5 hearts. You still keep everything intact. Over 3 no trump that shows 5 hearts. You can still queue in this situation or just transfer to hearts by bidding 4 diamonds, for example. And then over 3 hearts, which denies a 4 or 5 card major. One thing that is useful here is you can actually differentiate between a hand that had 5 spades, a responder who had 5 spades, and one who didn't. So, you have like this 3 spades in between step, as opposed to just bidding 3 no trump directly. If you flip the 3 hearts and 3 no bids, so you can actually have 3 spades be like a puppet to 3 no, and you can have 3 no actually show 5 spades, or you can flip those around. But I would say though, the advantage to keeping it that way is likewise with other things, you keep the strong hand concealed. So if you have 3 no show 5 spades, now the opener can just bid 4 spades with their hand. So it is a substitute for Smolin in that case to have something like that. So I would vote for Muppet stamen in that case. But I think you're just fine playing regular stamen in this case. And we'll play normal transfer responses to 2 no trump. And I'll talk about this 3 spade bid in a second. Now, one thing to note when it comes to like how to handle like the different types of major suited hands over 2 no trump is you have a lot less room because you're 1 level higher. So 2 no trump, 3 diamonds, 3 hearts, 3 spades. Before that might show like a kind of like just in your like typical bridge, you might think that might show a 4-5 invite, but we were just saying you would play Smolin in this case, so obviously that should mean something else. Now what this should actually mean And this is interesting. I actually hadn't really thought about this too much until a few weeks ago. And this was prodded by a partner who I'm just starting to play with, but he put this thought in my head, and it should have dawned on me earlier because, part of the whole thing when it comes to filling out a card and thinking about system, if you really want to get sophisticated with it, not that this is sophisticated, but, has a lot of nice bells and whistles, is that you want to be able to kind of like reduce redundancy. When it comes to reducing redundancy, if you're playing Smolin, over 2 no trump, you should have this bid, which would, in your classical bridge, show like 4 spades and 5 hearts means something else. And so what you would do in that case is you would actually use this to show a 5-5 hand, which seems weird. You're like, well, with 5-5, you usually bid the higher suit first and then bid the lower. But you actually have the ability now to differentiate between a 5-5 hand that's forward going and a 5-5 hand bid that just wants to drop in 4 of a major after partner opens 2 no trump. So the idea being here that if I have a 5-5 drop hand, it's going to go 2 no trump, and this would be similar to what you would do over 1 no trump. 2 no, 3 hearts as a transfer to 3 spades, and now partner bids 4 hearts to show 5-5. Now that's basically just a pass or correct for whatever your better fit is, and you play there. 2 no trump, oh, I'm sorry for this. 2 no trump, 3 diamonds, 3 hearts, 3 spades. That shows the 5-5 forward going hand. Now, first of all, if partner just was like 2-2 in the majors, you have a get out option and 3 no trump. But if you actually have a nice fit in one of these majors, you can actually kind of like gauge that in this case. So maybe what you would do in this situation is, 4 clubs being like acceptance of hearts and 4 diamonds is acceptance of spades. The reason, another advantage of this is based on, you still have the ability to kind of like transfer in that case. So you could actually still use the step afterwards to transfer into the suit if needed. Of course, you may not have completely right-sided this, but you have a 50% chance depending on what that major is. And you can still queue as needed and kind of like, figure out exactly if you have, the ability to find slam on this hand or not. So just to repeat, not gonna vote for, any form of like puppet or Muppet statement over 2 no trump, although I think puppet is an improvement over puppet. Just gonna play regular statement with Smolin. So transferring to hearts and bidding spades should show a 5-5 forward going hand. And then transferring to spades and bidding hearts would show like the 5-5 dropped hand. Now, the 3 spade bid. 3 spades, we've been talking about the majors. I think process of elimination would imply that this is our way to show the minors. So 3 spades is what we would call just a relay to 3 no trump, and partner is going to show some type of minor-oriented hand. Now, how do you actually show that more minor-oriented hand? There are some different variations of this, but one that I have kind of like classically played is that 4 of a minor is showing single suited like interest in that minor. You could of course flip it to stay consistent with the idea of keeping the strong hand concealed. I think either way works. And then bidding 4 of a major shows both minors with shortness in that major. Obviously, if you're 5-5 in the majors, you have shortness in one of those, or 5-5 in the minors, you have shortness in some major. So 4 hearts or 4 spades basically conveys that shape. And then you can use like your in-between bids to like confirm a fit for one suit or the next. And then you can kind of go from there. And so the idea being, 2 no, 3 spades, which is a transfer to 3 no trump, 4 hearts, showing both minors with shortness in hearts. 4 spades can be like your acceptance of clubs. 4 no trump can be your acceptance of diamonds. Maybe you just agree that you can't agree on no trump right then and there, and then you can go from there. And because this should be slam going. You wouldn't be showing this type of hand if you wanted to just get out of no trump entirely. You would either just pass or suck it up in bid 3. So there should be a forward going bid where 4 no trump probably isn't going to be played to begin with. So that's the idea to basically show that. Now to handle the single suited hands, whether you flip that or whether you just bid the suit that you have, one thing that I have played is I played optional key card responses to that. And you might be thinking, what is optional key card? So optional key card, the idea with this is that after a situation in which we've kind of like implied that this is our fit, basically my next bid over that says if I'm forward going with that or not. So 2 no trump, 3 spades, forcing 3 no, 4 clubs. We'll say this shows clubs in this situation. That's what I'm going to go with. If I bid the next step, 4 diamonds, that's like my, hey, I'm not very interested bid. If I bid anything else, that's a key card response, 4 clubs. So 2 no, 3 spades, 3 no, 4 clubs, 4 hearts would be 1 or 4 if we're playing 14-30. 4 spades would be the next step, and then so on and so forth. But if I bid the step after that suit, so 4 diamonds in the case of clubs or 4 hearts in the case of diamonds, that's basically like my, hey, I'm not super interested, response. And then likewise, if you show that I'm not super interested response, partner can still counter and bid the next step to force you to respond. So 2 no trump, 3 spades, 3 no, 4 clubs, 4 diamonds, I'm not very interested. 4 hearts, I don't care. I need you to respond. Now you follow up with that with your typical key card responses. Yeah, you're a little higher, but if partner's forcing you to respond, if you're blowing past 5 of a minor, it's probably going to work out in the end. So there is something to be said for that. So that is one thing. And optional key card, it doesn't come up super often, but I think this is a good utility for it because it's kind of like lets you figure out right away whether you're meant to pursue further or not. And if you were so inclined to pursue no matter what your partner showed, then I think you're going to be okay in just getting in missing 5 of a minor and maybe being in 6 on a finesse or something like that. So I think all will work out in that case. And then last but not least, 3 no trump. No need to play this as strong. We have that covered by 2 clubs, so we'll just call this gambling. With gambling, usually it's a running minor. I would say in first or second chair, just shouldn't have like anything outside the suit because I think it's I don't think it's very helpful if it is, because one of the ideas in bidding gambling no trump is if partner just has like the right hand where they have stoppers in the other suits. Maybe they have like they have nothing but like a stiff in your suit, which is pretty obvious to find because if you have a stiff in if you have a stiff in a minor, your partner almost for sure has that minor. So the idea with this is that basically a partner has like the 3 other kings that they just pass 3-no, and you find a 3-no trump contract that you weren't otherwise going to find. So that is the advantage of playing gambling and showing nothing outside in first and second chair. Now in third and fourth chair, you can certainly have extra. It's actually probably encouraged to have extra in this case because it would be really weird to be able to just open gambling 3-no. First of all, in fourth chair, that would almost be impossible. In third chair, it would certainly be strange because the hand behind you is just sitting with a stack. But there is something to be said for having extra there, and 3-no trump in that context is almost just saying, partner, I want to play 3-no trump, unless your hand is just the worst possible thing for this, we'll be okay. So there's no need to basically like pass or correct in that situation. Partner's almost saying, I got this. Even though I don't have traditional like strong hand for 3-no trump, we have the running suits to be able to make this. Now, PJ in chat asked, can we discuss when to pass when they double partners gambling 3-no trump? Now, this actually is something that's useful. I think it's also a bit of a meme. We're not going to shame the person in who belongs in my Discord server, but there was a hand posted from a junior trials a few years ago where their partner opened a gambling 3-no trump and the opponent doubled. And double, by the way, of a gambling 3-no trump basically is not just penalty, but almost 99% of the time implies the majors because, hey, if one hand's showing a single suited minor, guess what we're going to have a fit in most likely? The majors. So it conveys that. So if you're going to pass, your pass should basically not, your pass is basically saying, I'm okay playing 3-no trump. And if you can't tolerate that, whether you couldn't before or whether you certainly can't now because, that's made you think otherwise, you absolutely should just bid, your 4 clubs, pass or correct or do whatever to get out of this. Passing should be complicit. Now in the case, yeah, I guess it is mainly takeout oriented, mostly to the majors, but it's also going to come with enough points where you definitely have to think twice. Now in the case of the example we were referencing, this person ended up passing the 3-no trump bid, which their partner also assumed that meant, hey, I'm okay playing 3-no trump. And to the tune of minus, 1,700, 2,000, maybe the people can jog my memory on the exact telephone number. That didn't work so well. So it is important to be on the same page of what that means in that case. BZ asks, what is redouble in that case? Redouble could certainly be like, hey, you could think of redouble maybe as an option to be like, hey, you guys are really going to pay because if I was just going to pass, if I was just going to, run out with 4 clubs or 5 clubs in this case, then I guess redouble should mean, not only am I happy playing this, but they're absolutely done for if they try to run. So like if they were coming into this hand, let's like take out with like, some 4-4-4-1, like 14 or 15 count, my redouble can just be like, they're toast And, I think at that point, it's kind of like what you would just do if they, interfere with a strong no trump where, most doubles are going to be penalty in this situation. And you just send them flying and, remind them not to get in our house necessarily. So to reiterate, gambling should show a running minor. There are people who play it as a broken or even a solid major these days. That is become a little more popular. I don't have a super strong preference on that. I like to keep it the traditional way. And that's going to usually show nothing outside in first and second chair, and then third or fourth chair that should mean, hey, I mean business and I want to play 3 no trump. All right, well, I think that covers the no trump box. So in this episode, we talked about transfer Lebensal, how we handle interference and how you should brainstorm handling interference of your strong no trump opener. Things to consider are like the penalty double, 2 clubs showing the majors, 2 diamonds showing 1 major. I think those are like the typical follow-ups that would make you think otherwise. We talked about 2 no trump and how to show different major and minor suited hands. With 3 spades being a transfer to 3 no trump, playing your transfers and how you might differentiate between 5-5 interested and 5-5 not so interested. And then we spoke about gambling no trump. But I think this is a good stopping point. In the next episode, we are going to make our way downtown, walking around, and we'll cover the major box. But thank you guys for